The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions, and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to ARM Radio. I'm your host, Professor Jamie Lynn, with my special guest and friend, Gabe Silva, where tonight we're going to be talking truth. Since it's all about sex with this hashtag revolution, we're going to be discussing male versus female opinions, bipartisan views, government transparency, especially since we're in this political climate of sexual harassment with our political leaders. So thanks for joining us, Gabe.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be on the show. And I think that these are some very important topics we need to talk about. The Me Too hashtag campaign has been really controversial. So,
yeah, the hashtag Me Too. I'm gonna.
It just kind of went away.
Interrupt a little bit. I'm sorry. Because I need to know if my producer can hear you. I'm waiting for him to chime in. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Keep talking.
I can barely hear him. You can't get the phone any closer to the microphone?
It's an honor to be on the show and talk about the Me Too hashtag campaign, the fourth wave feminism, started in 2006 and made popular by Alyssa Milano. From what I just read, I just did a little quick search on it.
Turn the phone around.
Where it started.
Okay, keep talking. He's telling me to turn the phone around.
The speaker's on the back where the camera is.
So I checked it out, and my general quick take on my take on the Me Too hashtag campaign is that the way it was politicized, it kind of, in my opinion, took away from true victims that were, harassed and sexually abused and things of that nature. And so I think it's kind of a tragedy in that fact that it was kind of hijacked.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But continue on the male versus female perspective. So obviously, as a female being exposed to sexual harassment, I have openly been a civil rights activist myself for domestic violence and rape and things like that. Obviously, the female version is going to look a little bit different than the male version. So we're really appreciative of you sharing your opinion on that.
Well, a couple things come to mind. First, that it's a very serious, sexual harassment and any kind of sexual misconduct is a very serious thing, and I absolutely do not want to downplay the severity of that. I think it's far more common than people realize. From a male perspective, myself, I've been grabbed, I've been, harassed, by many females, and so the thing is that I think it's on both sides. I think that it's less commonly, talked about on the male side from the male perspective, and then also there's this stigma around it. So now what we're having, because it's been politicized so heavily, I think that it's kind of making males nervous. They don't want to be in certain situations, like they might get accused of something, and they don't want to put themselves in that situation. So that's kind of how I feel about it in a nutshell.
Wow, that's amazing, and I'm so happy that you talked about that. I'm actually here in Palm Springs. I'm with my mom, who's chief pilot of American Airlines. She's a captain, and she's here speaking about discrimination within the workplace for pilots. And it's representative of the LGBT community. I was raised by two gay women, but what you just said is so profound, because there's men that are coming up and talking about not only is it women that are sexually harassed or even abused, that it happens to men. And the male, when it's not happening to them, but they're watching a female, that it impacts them emotionally and psychologically to watch other men do this to other women. And so this is a hot topic where we're at today, and I'm super impressed that you shared that. Thank you.
I just that's kind of been my thing, is because I don't know if it happens. I don't really know the how common it is for men, because it's men don't really talk about it. They don't want to say anything about it, and things like that. So because we're men, we got to be tough and quit complaining some girl grabbed you or whatnot. And then also, I musician touring around and playing in different clubs, different cities, and I've had women come up to me and just grab me or things like that, so it's like, it feels to me a little bit different from the man perspective. And then, it probably happens a lot more common to females, but you don't hear about when it does happen to males. And then on the other side of it, males are kind of, lately been hearing from a lot of males that we're reluctant to be in a situation or put ourselves in a situation where we can be accused of something like that. And then you were talking about the pilots and in the airlines and things. So I'm not sure, are we bringing into like an inequality or an equality type of thing to like maybe like pay scale wise, or are we strictly talking about sexual misconduct?
Well, I think they go hand in hand, right? I mean, sexual misconduct occurs across the board, but the sexual mentality that evolves into sexual misconduct does impact pay scales or the way that we view men versus women and compensation of pay. So I think we could discuss them exclusively, but we could also discuss them collaboratively.
So I think that, also what comes to mind is the psychological aspects of just, human sexuology or psychology, because there's that, first of all, there's the social aspects of the pecking order, and then you have a male boss and a female employee, or a female boss and a male employee. I think that whether or not, subconsciously, whether or not we realize it consciously, just like when someone walks into the room, we realize if they are attractive to us or not. Whether or not we're interested or ever would address that, I think there's a psychology that comes into play there as well. And then certain people treat that and act on it, where other people wouldn't. So maybe that has to be addressed as well, as just the fact that it's in our psychology to have attractions for people, but it's the choices of our behavior, that really determine whether something is misconduct or not.
I think it's important to recognize, that as a male and a female, we're going to have sexual attraction to each other, and how do you deal with that within the workplace, right? So a male is going to be attracted to a female and may want to pursue that, but there's a way in which you pursue it. So I think with the hashtag #MeToo and the controversy that we have surrounding that really requires us to just be outspoken and address sexual attraction, sexual inclination in general, because I don't think we're ever going to avoid that. I think it's human nature that when I'm in a workplace or I'm in a social place or I'm in a familial place where maybe an outside person comes into our family and I'm physically attracted to you sexually, that sometimes my behavioral reactions are going to be conducive with that. And so I think talking in general that sex is normal, that sexual attraction is going to occur, and that how do we handle that within a workplace, a time, a place, the environment, as opposed to saying we're just not going to talk about sexual attraction, or that men and women are physically or sexually attracted to each other and it's not allowed. I don't know. I think that's a little taboo, but I think that that's an important point that with this hashtag #MeToo, people are missing.
Yeah, there's definitely an effect there. And like you said, it's how you go about it. It's the etiquette of what is transpiring. Certain people might have a different viewpoint on what is okay and what is not. I mean, of course, there are certain things that are, widely accepted within society, and just running up and grabbing somebody because you're sexually attracted to them is obviously going to be, way out there and across the guidelines. But there is going to be, as you get closer to the guidelines, what, society considers okay and etiquette, that's when you're going to find that gray area. And then also, subconsciously, are you going to favor an attractive woman or an attractive man over an unattractive woman or an unattractive man when it comes to, the workplace? Are you going to give them higher wages? Are you going to give them favors or leeway, let them go if they're late? I mean, that all that stuff comes into play. And then, you get back into the #MeToo hashtag. Whenever things are politicized, it changes things. So now you have people that are going out of their way to make sure that they don't get accused of anything like that. Whereas before this hashtag, when it came out, they bring in before it came out, there was, employers like, it really got heavily publicized during the Henry Weinstein thing. And so, you have this guy that's, you want to get in a role in a movie or something. He's answering the door with his towel. And, that kind of thing is just totally irresponsible and disgusting in my opinion. But that kind of thing, happened a lot more. Maybe people weren't aware of it. So in essence, the hashtag #MeToo campaign did work, and it did put people on notice that, hey, this has been addressed and we're paying attention. But on another note, it has been heavily publicized and made controversial in the manner in which it was publicized.
What do you think the controversy is about? I know for myself as a woman and being part of the women's movement, I hear other women say that they don't want to be part of the hashtag #MeToo. I hear other women that say they're all about the hashtag #MeToo. What do you think that's about?
I think it kind of has to do with the fact that, for instance, just I don't want to really bring in the left and right thing, but the lexicon of the word...
Do it, man. Do it, Gabe. Bring in the left and the right. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I know. Well, see, the lexicon of the word liberal has changed, all right? And so the lexicon of the word feminism has changed. So that's kind of where you get that controversy because, some people view feminism as these girls that, shave their head, dye their hair black, short hair black, and they put tape over their nipples or they go out naked to prove a point, and people are, disgusted by that and think that, that's not the feminism that they know, or they don't like feminism anymore because of that. I recently seen someone update their Facebook and say, what is feminism to you? And most of the comments described what I just described there. So the whole lexicon of feminism is completely changed, and that's why we get two different sides to feminism, and you can relate that to the Me Too campaign, where, some people say, hey, they're just using that because they are accusing candidates of, this sexual misconduct that might have happened 6 years ago, whereas there's really needs some attention on, people, men and women that are being sexually harassed and, and abused. So that's kind of the duality of it, in my opinion.
Well, let's go back to that. I do want to talk about feminism, and I do want to talk about sex. I'm a woman in my 40s. I'm a single mother of 4, and the way that we view sex now is different, especially in a political environment, than it was 20 years ago, than it was 40 years ago. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about what it's like to be feminine as opposed to a feminist. I personally struggle with the word feminism because as a humanitarian, I want to be equality. I want to be humanitarian. I don't want to be feminism. I don't want to be masculine. I don't want the divide. I don't want the bipartisan. I don't want the separation. I want us to all be seen as one. And when it comes to sexual feelings about myself or sexual interaction between men and women or sexual joking in the workplace, I think that we need to address that issue is the judgment behind what does today mean to be feminine and what does today mean to be sexually comfortable with myself or sexually inclined to discuss it openly and publicly as opposed to prior to it wasn't talked about, it was taboo. And then we saw with the Clinton era, if we go back to politics, this huge explosion to sexual harassment in the workplace and what it's like to be feminine, to be a woman in a working environment and a political environment with, Bill Clinton. And so we've got all of these different topics and directions that we could go down, but I do think it's important that we talk about what it's like to be a woman today based off of the generation that you are and how that translates into this hashtag Me Too. And one more thing that after we, finish focusing on this is the psychology, as you mentioned, is when you do report that sexual harassment has occurred, or you do report that you've been sexually molested, or you do report that you've been raped, some of the issues that, are happening in the military, women are raped in the military, even some men are raped in the military. So I know I'm bringing up a lot of stuff because I get excited, but I mean, you're a man, you're a father. What do you think feminism, for women is like? What is your take on it?
My take on it, well, I think it basically stems from, there's two different things that I think. Basically, there's an agenda being pushed sexually, and it has to do, because sex has been super publicized for a long time. And I heard about, women in the Air Force being sexually abused, like decades ago, and it's been an ongoing thing. And hazing and all kinds of things like that. And then, for feminism, to me, it originates because, the traditional family, in my opinion, has been attacked and taken apart. But we don't live in that old school way now, and, equality's been being pushed. So you have single mothers like yourself, and you go out and you expect to be treated. You don't have to be a stay-at-home mom. You can go out and work and be, the breadwinner, and a guy can be at home watching the kids. There's been a role reverse in some cases. There's a whole different dynamic to everything nowadays. So that's why you see, this feminism, in my opinion, coming out to where they're like, hey, we want equal pay, we want this, we want that, because we are equal. We do work and we take care of ourselves, and we are no different than a man. And, for me, I would like to venerate the housewife because I think that that's a huge, important job, and has to do with the upbringing of the children, and even whether you're a guy or you're a girl and you're raising kids at the house, just educating them and spending time with them. That's a huge thing, and it's having an effect and the consequences on our society about the quality of care our children are getting. But that's where I think it comes from, the fact that the dynamic has changed in the household and in the workplace, where you're not seeing the mom stay home and the traditional family unit. But I also do think, along with that observation, I think it's an actual agenda that is being pushed to bring everything to fruition, basically, of just basically separating the traditional family unit and bringing about where there is no set, masculinity and femininity. That's why you're seeing all the different types of genders, and you're seeing, all the different things. We're talking about, like the transgenders. We're talking about less than 1% of the population, but you'll see in the news, the bathroom issue and all that kind of thing. So there's a level of, propaganda, I want to say, in the mainstream media, because if you see things in the mainstream media, there's a reason for it. And that's why you're seeing this issue that we're addressing completely just all through the media for the last few decades.
Absolutely, man. I always forget how smart you are. You're so brilliant. You served in the military?
I was in the Army for a short time.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the Air Force. So my mom was in the Air Force, and she taught at the Air Force, and she's a part of a movement now that is speaking out publicly about the rapes that were occurring and have been occurring amongst the military, and particularly the Air Force, and looking at how we implement change, right? So you're right, propaganda happens because it's real. So whether we're talking about sex and feminism, if we're talking about sexual harassment, if we're talking about unequal pay, if we're talking about transgender and paradigm shifts with laws on how the bathrooms occur. I mean, we could go on, but bringing it full circle back to you and I having been very heavily actively involved in freedom and, restoring the Constitution of America. We're both Californians. We're kind of rare because we're Republicans. I personally like to refer to myself as a libertarian, but we don't ever get that ticket. We were close with Ron Paul, but the point being is, where is our government stepping in and saying, we have these issues with sex. We've got sexual propaganda. Sex is huge everywhere on social media, with our youth, within the workplace, within the school environment, for even our children. And how do we have growth moving forward as a society, as citizens of the United States, and say, we have to do something about this. So I'd like to switch a little bit and get to that other point of the topic when we're talking about, the truth with #MeToo is, what are our politicians really doing to move forward with these things that we know are real? So what's your opinion and take on that?
Well, since I haven't really understood exactly what, is being done to deal with any of this, really, honestly. I mean, the bathroom thing is, we basically took off the bathroom that says man and woman, and it's just a bathroom for anybody. That is, something that has been done. In some cases, you're having, someone that identifies as a certain gender going to different bathroom than they were biologically born as, and that has caused some issues. And whether or not that's been heavily propagandized, we don't know. We've seen stories on both sides, so you can't really. In this information age, there's so much misinformation coming from both sides that it's hard to dissect through it and see what the actual statistics are, because you can find a report that's been butchered to look like whatever, so that's kind of tough. I think that what else has happened? We've had the bakers. Recently, the baker was, ruled on here in California that he didn't have to bake a cake for a gay person, but however, in Oregon, I believe it was in a different state, not California. The person's business, the baker's business, was literally destroyed, and thousands and thousands of dollars in litigation because he refused to bake a cake for a gay couple's wedding. So we've seen it go both sides in the judicial system. And then, I just really want to point out the fact that there is a push. I mean, look at Teen Vogue magazine putting out, teaching about anal sex and pushing different types of propaganda in their magazine to these young kids. In California, we had a controversy in Rockland, California, real close to home, in Northern California here, about a kindergarten teacher reading a book about transgenders to kindergartners. And then we also have a curriculum being added to education in California that teaches elementary school kids about LGBTQ issues. So that is kind of, to bring it into from the books and the literature that is surrounding all of us is now getting injected into our education system. So there is a fundamental transformation occurring right now, right before our eyes.
That's so true, and that's a huge point that you make, and I don't want to argue one side or the other, because obviously I have my own beliefs. I was raised by two gay women. I have, stories about growing up with not being able to have sleepovers. I would have parents worried that their children would be molested because I had two, moms.
Not really funny.
And it didn't matter that, one of my moms is a high-ranking official from the Air Force Academy, a pilot. My other mom is successful, real estate agent. I did have a dad. It was a very eclectic family household for us. So it's interesting for me, story-wise, to watch the story change and unfold, because I've grown up in the LGBT community and I've seen nothing but kindness and intelligence and family unit, values and ethics and morals and everything that I think most people find in a straight family. But when then you have religious perspectives or other people's biases on what that means to be same-sex, gender, neutral, or changing your gender, your God-given gender into the opposite. And so looking at it from an educational perspective and seeing these books in school is fascinating. So I'm not really commenting either way. I'm just sharing the story of, for me, what it's been like watching from a military family. My dad also, fought in Nam, and it was a helicopter, airborne. And so I come from a family that's highly educated, highly devoted to our country, and religious for that matter. My moms are actually two different religions. One is Christian and one is Hindu. So it's fascinating when you look at political environments of sex, gender, religion, and education, and that what we're finding in the school system and what we're teaching, and whether we agree or we disagree, and then how that translates into whether it's a Republican or a Democratic representative, what it means to be separation of church and state. I personally, because I always default back to I'm a humanitarian, I believe in human rights, I believe in loving and being kind to all. So to me, the bigger issues, as most people know, I always default back to is vaccine injury and what we're doing with medical freedom. I don't want to get off topic, but I felt inclined. So.
Thanks for sharing that. I'll share something with you too. I am a humanitarian in some aspects too myself. You know, I try to be compassionate and I try to not harm people. I am a libertarian, except, you know, I do think that, you know, I'm a realist too, that kind of pushes me towards, you know, being more, I'm a Republican because I can't be a libertarian because of the realism in me. You know, it's just the fact is that one side's going to push, the other side's going to push, and whoever it pushes the hardest, that's the world we're going to live in. I do have 2 gay cousins, and I've never had a problem with, you know, being around them at all. I mean, to me, I think that what it is that we've all, I don't want to play victim here because I hate that, but I think that we've all been victimized by the fact of politics. We've been exploited, and this could have been a situation that didn't have to be, have to draw a straight line in the sand like it was, because it's been, you know, exploited by the Dems to get votes, and demographic-wise, in my opinion, you know, some people can disagree, of course, obviously, but the reason why is because if they didn't exploit that fact and they didn't heavily politicize it the way they did, to me, it's like sexuality is your business. It's not my business. You know, like we can just talk, we can have, you know, intellectual discourse, we can go about our business. And, you know, I've worked with a gay guy and we never talked about anything like that. And we were cool. You know, I mean, it shouldn't be an issue, but I think that what happens in politics is it's exploited and it's made a huge issue. And then, you know, whenever you start requiring people to use pronouns and now you're forcing them to change their behavior based on your beliefs, that's where, you know, we get into these issues, you know what I mean? Where you require someone to change their behaviors for you, that could go either way. If either side does that, then that's when you're going to get that realism in there, and whoever pushes the hardest, that's where, you know, you're going to have that war. And so that's why I think that we've been affected, is because of the exploitation of it in the media and things like that. So just look at the bathroom issue. We're talking about less than 1% of the population. And when I took abnormal psychology in college, and, you know, it was abnormal to be gay in that psychology class. You know what I mean?
You know, homosexuality used to be in the DSM. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I was taught that homosexuality was a deviant behavior, that it was something that needed to be rectified. When you look back across centuries, they would kill and torture if you were known to have some homosexual tendencies.
Yeah, you know, I of course, I'm a humanitarian. I don't agree with, you know, torturing, you know, gays or killing gays, you know, but what I'm saying, though, is that that's what was taught for a long time, and I think that what they're trying to do is change. They're trying to change all that, you know. They just want everybody to get along and be cool. But see, the problem is that, you know, that's why I tell you that my belief is a bigger agenda coming in, and it's attack on the traditional family, and we're being attacked ethically and all this stuff, because if they could bring it in a whole different manner, and it wouldn't be, you know, filled with animosity and so many lines drawn in the sand. I think it's being exploited for a reason, and that's because the attack on the traditional family and the ethics and things of that nature. To me, we can be gay and we can work together and we'll be fine. We don't have to talk about that's your business. When you go home and you do what you do in your life, that's your business. I have no reason to say anything about that. You know what I mean? And vice versa. Maybe they think I'm the crazy one. Why do I like girls? You know, like, maybe I'm the crazy one. But that's nobody's business, right? You got to look at it from their perspective, too. You know, so, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things that life is not always just black and white. There's gray area there, and that's where realism comes in. You know?
Look, we have to talk about I want to talk about the elephant in the room, though, because this is what's going through my head, and I think many people. Guys love it when two girls are with each other. So here we talk about, you know, that homosexuality is this deviant behavior, and that it's problematic, and that, oh my gosh, we're teaching it and we're addressing that, but we have a whole environment right now sexually of like how hot it is for two girls to be with each other. Now, the younger generation, it's super cool, like if you're bisexual. You're seeing a trend, too, even when it comes to things that are more stigmatic, like two guys with each other. He's like, he's the cool gay best friend. Here we're talking about values and ethics and morals, and then controversy politically and controversy educationally, and yet socially, if we really look at this from a psychological perspective and social influence or social collective viewpoints, I'm going to say that right now we're in a trend that gay is kind of cool.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing, is that a while back they've learned that culture or politics is downstream from culture. So that's why you see these things pushed, and that's why you see all of a sudden on every sitcom they had to have a gay character. Okay, that's why you see the books being taught in school now whenever they were never talked about before, because if they change the culture, then they can enforce the legislation. And that's coming from me. People can disagree with me because I'm conservative and I'm coming from a Christian belief system. I'm a Christian, and so I'm going to say it that way because that's my beliefs. And other people are going to say it completely opposite if they're on the other side of the coin. So that's just the reality, and that's why I always come back to realism. Is this is what I believe, and I believe in this agenda, and I believe they're changing it with culture. Just like, and to get to the root of the problem, the problem is that we have. Let's take materialism for instance. Like the rap culture and like gold spinners and chains and the gangster stuff and materialism being pushed in and people being judged for what you have instead of who you are. All right, it's the same thing. That brought in a whole line of materialism and broke down people respecting true heroes that had good character and integrity and those type of ethics. And now you have the gay character in every movie and in a sitcom. You have the innuendos and everything else in Hollywood. And so basically the Hollywood is the tool. They can push the agenda through Hollywood and through the magazines like Teen Vogue with their anal sex article that teaches why anal sex is cool. Why are two girls cool together? Why do men think that? Because it's been brought that way to us for such a long time, and now it's a normality. It's a normal thing, and it's being normalized. And so you're seeing a bunch of youngsters. They grew up in an era that was new to us to see that kind of stuff. Well, now it's been normalized to them. It's all they've ever known. So they don't know any difference,
That's so true. The trend we're seeing in normalcy when it comes to views on sex and sexual orientation, and perhaps that does transfer into what we're experiencing with the hashtag Me Too, that we feel like because sex is everywhere now, it's in movies, it's on our social media sites, it's in our topical conversations, that what's the big deal if we're in our we're in our work environment and I'm going to start making sexual comments? It's because we've made it comical, we've made it valid, we've made it interesting, that this is something to be accepted. So how do we cope with that trend that we're seeing, but still in a work environment, take our work seriously and have equality when it comes to progressing up the chain and the ladder and not having a glass ceiling effect?
Do you believe that the trend is being manufactured or that the trend is naturally occurring?
Say that again. Do I believe that the trend is being manufactured or naturally occurring?
Yeah.
I think it's both. I think that as human beings in our environment and socially engaging in relationships, that there's a natural occurrence. However, it's being controlled by media. It's controlled by what we see, what we're reinforced. We went from micro communities to having viewpoints of ethics and morality and religion to broad globalization of technology that allows us to have a different influence that's manufactured by agendas behind the scenes. It's an interesting topic because you've got a political view and you've got a social view. So the decline, and the religious view, we can talk about the decline of religion. Statistics are very solid that we're in a decline of religion, that less and less people believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. We used to have most of the population believe that. We've got an East meets West. We've got globalization and industrialization that are, toe to toe and influencing or manufacturing what we're seeing now in society fold itself out. So I think it's a combination of natural, because things happen over time naturally, but of course there's a manufactured influence through media and things that we take into our environment that went from being a small micro unit to a large macro and global influence.
Yeah, it's definitely bidirectional at this point. But I think that personally, it has a lot to do with the. I read a book recently called "The Death of the West" by Pat Buchanan, and so the thing is that this was founded. It was a Judeo-Christian society, right? Country, and that's the thing is that we're no longer the same makeup, the same demographics as that we were whenever this country was founded. We've taken in people with different beliefs and backgrounds from all over the world, and we're the melting pot. So that's why things are changed the way they are, and so you're going to have the decline of certain things, and out of that is going to be a new type of society. And so I think that a lot of this stuff is the growing pains of that, the effects of what's going on there. For me to get back straight into it, I mean, you said that you learned that it was abnormal to be gay or sexual deviant or whatnot, and to me, it's just publicized in such a way. It's everywhere. You cannot escape it. Whenever you look at the percentage of the demographics there, you ask yourself, why is there a need to have a gay character on every single sitcom just to prove and virtue signal that you are, about equality? Why does it have to be in our kids' education system? Why does it have to be in every magazine? Why does it have to be so heavily propagandized by the mainstream media? Because that tells me that there's an agenda. So it tells me that it's being manufactured. And then, I think it would be hard to argue that it wasn't occurring organically as well, because behavior is learned too. In behavioral psychology, you have some people that get around maybe this gay couple, and they're really cool, and you know what, and it makes them think about stuff that they probably wouldn't have thought about before, and so you're just going to see it, spread and be, grown in that nature too. So I think you're kind of right. It is bidirectional. And it just depends, it just comes down to what is going to happen in the future. Where are we at? This is where we're at now, so what's going to occur next,
It's interesting that if you think about comparing the reality of the shift between homosexuality and compare it to interracial. So if you look at how we started to integrate the minority, you're brown, I'm white, and if you go even browner and you look at what we traditionally call black people or African American, and you look at the shift in the American society on what was considered normal or deviant, you had white people interracially, producing with browns or blacks, that was considered deviant. And we didn't have Instagram, and we didn't have Facebook, and we didn't have television during those revolutions. When Abraham Lincoln and our president was fighting in the South versus the North, that was done through some manufacturing with newspapers, I'm sure. But there was like you said, a bi-directional within the community of what people were starting to rebel against, that we wanted equality when it came to colored folk compared to the white folk from the British Empire. You can even go further back with the Native Americans and see that, that trend. So, and then women. I mean, I'd love to talk, obviously, coming back to the hashtag Me Too, women are still the most discriminated against out of any group, because when you take into account that we're more than half of the population, I believe we're 51 to 52% over men. It's a small margin, but it's still a margin nonetheless. That women, that we are still the most discriminated against. We are still abused. We are still sexually assaulted. We're still physically assaulted at rates that we'd like to see shift. And so I think it's interesting that we're so big in talking about, civil rights when it comes to minority groups, and yet we forget that the women are still the majority and yet the most impacted by what's happening in society.
You know what comes to mind to me is political correctness. I think it's the one thing that's handcuffs for our mouths. We can't talk about certain things because, it just makes people uncomfortable. I kind of felt like, maybe I'm wrong, but I kind of felt like maybe whenever you were saying like black, who we usually call black, I felt like that maybe there was like some uncomfortability there just because it's such a hot item, you don't want to offend anybody.
Right.
Right. There's a political correctness issue there. It's just like, say it, it's like, who cares? Like, that's where I'm at nowadays because I'm just like, hey, we have to talk about these things. If we can't talk about these things, we can't address them. Like Japan, if Japan looks out for Japanese people and legislates things that would give Japanese people a benefit over other people that are immigrants in their country, Japanese in many other countries do that. But if, America was to do something to legislate, whites to have, some type of better stepping stool than any other race, it would be a huge issue. Like, America isn't allowed to preserve its Judeo-Christian values or the white population that it was mostly made up of. And I say that, and like you said, I'm brown, but I can say that, but if,
I say it, I'm like, you're brown. Don't get mad at me.
It's highly, controversial for me to say that. There's a lot of people that would argue that the white Europeans did come here and did establish this country. And then you have, I don't want to go too far off topic. I'm just using it as an example because, use it as an example or whatnot. So if they were trying to preserve this country, to preserve it to be white, Judeo-Christian society, that would be wrong. But in the same token, it's okay and widely accepted by Americans for other countries to do it. For instance, Mexico, their immigration policies are completely strict compared to America's, but yet we're going to come down and be really hot item subject on how we treat our immigration, and we're far less strict than Mexico is. So it's just like the PC is ruining our ability to talk to each other and conversate, about these types of things. And I think that was a good comparison that you did whenever you compared, the race mixing to the intermixing with, gay, LGBT. I don't want to say just gay because I don't want to leave anybody out, but the LGBTQ issues that are going on. And now what you're seeing is, let's bring this up. What you're seeing is now in California, they're saying that pedophilia is just naturally occurring, and these people have rights too. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Being a marriage and family therapist, and my internship when I first got out of graduate school was actually with pedophilia and looking at deviant behavior with not only pedophilia but serial killers. And brain studies are absolutely showing that there can be a disruption in the neuroconnective patterns in a human brain that lead a person to sexually assault consciously children, as well as find a need to torture and maim individuals. And that during interviews of these folks, they realize that it's obviously inappropriate, but that they couldn't stop themselves. And that they wish they could. And in some cases, when you had, really pathological sociopathic behavior, they got off on it, and their brains, when brain studies were done, would light up in certain regions of their hypothalamus and their amygdalas that showed an abnormality. And so that's a huge debate, on looking at what do all humans have rights? And I think that you and I could always fall down rabbit holes because you're extremely intelligent and you're very well diversified. So what I would like to do at this point, though, is come back to and try and transitionally tie in deviant behavior, if you will, and bring it back to women and women and the depersonalization, the labeling of women being whores. So if we could full circle come back, and I'd always love to continue the debate with you on the human rights and interpreting the Constitution, since we're both constitutionalists. But looking at women and the male perspective that you guys have on a woman who is sexually active. Last week on my radio show, we talked about online dating and myself being a single woman, single mother of 4, and doing some online dating and being able to balance being a mother, a professional, and trying to find a partner in life after divorce, things like that. But I've been accused many times over my life of being a whore. Even prior to getting married, you know, when I was in high school, the word whore, the word bitch, the word slut is very commonly used to describe women who like to explore their sexuality or, you know, have the same rights that men have. Whereas men, you guys are the shit, right? You guys, he's like the bro, hit that, you know, like, you guys get glorified for being able to be sexually promiscuous, and yet we get called names. And you do see that translate into the topic of the hashtag Me Too, or when women like us stand up and say, I've been assaulted, that even though I'm comfortable with my sex and I have experienced multiple partners, or I'm okay with inexclusive dating or whatever the topic may be, when then it comes time to say, but this person inappropriately touched me, or this person I told no to and they continued, all of a sudden we're crazy, all of a sudden we're a liar, all of a sudden we asked for it. So, you know, that's the struggle. And coming back to that, what is your belief on that?
I think that, you know, just basically you have to understand where I'm coming from to understand what I'm about to say. And that's because I believe that that's the degradation of our values and our family unit and everything that's wrong with this country. That's why you have Antifa kids fighting out in the street right now for communism. Because the problem is that our culture has been manufactured, in my opinion, for an agenda to push and to get us in a certain spot the way we are. We're being divided right now. And I think that the reason why, whenever I grew up, you know, like you said, you know, it was like you were the cool guy if you got all kinds of girlfriends and you got all kinds of sex from different girls. You know
right?
What I mean? I was a rock star, you know what I mean? I was on stage playing all the time. You know, I had girls, you know, grabbing me, but, you know, it wasn't sexual harassment to me. It's just because I was wanted, you know what I mean? But if I was to go up and just grab a girl, if I was you know, a rock star, they wouldn't say nothing. They would have liked it. They would have been like, all right, whatever. But then if you weren't some cool rock star guy and you did that to some girl, then it would be unacceptable. So that's why I was talking about widely accepted behaviors, socially accepted behaviors, and as you get closer to that line, there's that gray area. You know, for me, I think that we push for promiscuity, to be promiscuous too much in our culture right now. We need to bring back the values. We need to make America great again. I think that's the problem. That's why you're seeing a lot of the problems go on, is because we've gotten away from God and the traditional family, and I think that's why we're promoting something that is abnormal psych, you know, and you know, this is why I don't want to offend anybody, but you know, maybe my beliefs are just offensive, and I think that that's why, it's because we're heavily politicizing abnormal behavior. We're telling people that it's okay to go and, you know, and do all these things, and then we're complaining whenever our society has all these problems with it, whenever, you know, and then is it evolution? You know, so I'm very analytical and I don't really know everything, and I'm like trying to be open-minded, so I'm always like, it'll lead my mind into like, well, is it evolution? Is this supposed to happen? Are we supposed to break down all the walls? I don't know. You know, was it inevitable for everything to break down? Who knows?
Look, you are going to offend a lot of people with your make America great again, but that's the beauty, right, of the First Amendment and freedom of speech, because coming back to, you know, talking about sex and the hashtag Me Too, is Trump has been chronically accused of sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior with women, and being a sexist. So it's like...
The thing is, go ahead.
No, I was just, you know, pointing out that is the great part about being American. It's the great part about, I think, our Constitution, and I think amazing about, you know, sex. Like, you can talk about sex, you can be sexual, you can have a different view on it, and then you can, in one sentence, say, make America great again.
Hey, but see, the thing is because I'm just saying that, like, to me, that we've gotten away and we've gotten to lot of problems. Kids don't treat like they used to because people will kidnap them. People will harm them. They can't go to school because they might get shot by some person that felt like they were bullied, or someone that's been taking too many big pharma drugs. Now, does big pharma drugs have an effect on what's going on here in our country?
Absolutely.
25% of the world's medications, and we're not even close to 25% of the population. So that's kind of the issue here, is that, to me, that we need to change our culture. We need to get back to promoting ethics, the character. We need to glorify people that have integrity and honesty and those kind of things, instead of making it normal for everybody to do things that are not ethical. It's like, well, everybody does it. Everybody cheats on their tests, so it's okay to do it, right? Well, what about doing the right thing when no one's looking? When does that start becoming cool again? I'm just a family guy, so I want to promote family values, and that's kind of like my thing. I want to protect kids. I don't like pedophiles, and I'm not going to promote pedophilia, and I'm not going to say that it's okay and try to give them their comfortability with that. I don't think that we should look down on women if they do, go out and work and they want to, promote their life and do whatever they want in their life in that manner. I think we're worried about everybody too much instead of taking responsibility of our own lives. We're too much trying to control everybody and legislate everything, in my opinion.
I agree with that. I think if we just allow humans to be free and have their own opinion and their own behavioral patterns, like you said, if you will, in peace, as long as you're doing it peacefully and within your own integral way, then why not? But again, we have a climate currently that's still judgmental, that's still opinionated, that still thinks we should force what we believe is right onto society, as opposed to allowing the freedom within. So whatever type of controversy we're talking about, whether it's sexual promiscuity, or it's vaccine injury, or it's transgender issues, or the gay and lesbian community, or the black community, or the feministic community, at the end of the day, as long as we have the freedom to do what we want to do, that's safely in accordance with not hurting anybody else, then I see why not.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at. That's what makes me a libertarian in that way, is because I don't have a problem with someone being how they want to be and doing what they want to do. What gets us in a war is when you start legislating these things, and now that comes that realism. It's like, all right, well, this person can be gay and come to work and do whatever they do, and that's fine. If you don't like them, you don't hang out with them or whatever. If they don't like you, they don't hang out with you. We can all
don't bake them a cake.
Yeah, if they don't want to bake you a cake, go to another cake maker. So to me, it's no big deal, But whenever you start legislating stuff, that's whenever you have, all this fighting happen, and you start having, the news get involved and push the agenda, and then, maybe the news is pushing the agenda so it can cause division, so we can fight each other. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but that's the issue, and then that kind of actually proves, or not proves, but it's kind of helps my case about realism. Is the fact is that maybe it's in our human nature, and we're going to just push to make this world what we want it to be, and everybody else is going to push. And the fact is that whoever pushes the hardest, that's the world we're going to live in.
I know we don't have a lot of time left, but politically, I like to talk about puppetry. And I'm sure you know what I mean when we talk about politics and puppetry, and how do we really bring back the freedom that we deserve to be who we want to be, especially with you and I in the state of California.
Yeah, to me, I've come up with this formula, and it's called passion plus action equals change.
Say that again. Hold on. Say that again.
It's passion plus action. Change.
Okay.
So whatever you're passionate about, take action about it, and that's when change will happen. Because a ball doesn't start rolling unless it's kicked. A ball doesn't stop rolling unless someone stops it. So if you want something to change, be an activist, get involved, go to town halls, rallies, go to legislative hearings, join a campaign and get someone elected. elected. Whatever it is, if you want to promote gay rights, if you don't want to promote gay rights, whatever it is you believe in, just get active with your passion and you will get change.
I like that. Do you have a place where people can find you to support this cause a little bit more?
I'm Gabe Silva on Facebook, and I also have a Facebook group called Passion Plus Action Change, and I also have a public figure page, Gabe Silva. So I'm maxed out on my friends list, but you can follow me. And it's been one heck of a time lately trying to get the word out on Facebook and social media. But I welcome everybody to come and give me your opinion. I think that's what we need to do. We need to have these conversations.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So before we wrap up, I think we have about a minute left. What would you say to women around the world today in terms of being vocal about when the sex issue is arising within the workplace?
I would say to women, be strong, stand your ground, and to everybody experiencing any kind of inequality or abuse or anything like that, do not remain quiet. Speak up and speak your piece and be brave for those that are not strong enough to speak up.
Awesome. I would say that too. I would also say that when you do speak up, put it in writing, speaking up and going to rallies and being politically and actively involved is amazing.
You gotta go.
One thing I've learned is to put things in writing. So thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate you being here with Professor Jamie Lynn and Armed Radio.